This is 101, week 12, part 3. And this is the spring of 2021. Okay, cool. So for this lecture so far, I have summarized the entire class. That was units 1, 2, and 3 involving the Phaedrus, and I talked a little bit about the discussion board comments. So good. And then I talked about what the exam is. Now, I assume you probably don't have any questions about Plato's Phaedrus or papers 1, 2, and 3. But if you do, ask. I will accept late papers, so maybe you haven't done some of those yet. Maybe you didn't do paper 1 or paper 2 or paper 3. Maybe you didn't do the revision on paper 1 and paper 2 and paper 3. The revision, by the way, is optional. If you're happy with the grade you got on the first draft of paper 1 or the first draft of paper 2 or the first draft of paper 3, you can keep it. But if you'd like that grade on that to be higher, and I don't give out A's on first draft, so you might want that. But if you want that grade to be higher, you can revise it. When are revisions due? By May 17th, probably the end of this semester. So for the first 3 units of the class, you can make sure you watch all the first 11 lectures. You can work on paper 1, 2, and 3. If you've already done paper 1, 2, and 3, you can do revisions of paper 1, 2, and 3. And then also you want to have 20 substantial discussion board comments by the end of the semester. What's a substantial discussion board comment? It's something where you give me your opinion backed up by a reason and an example. And that's it for units 1, 2, and 3. And then now we're on unit 4. And so unit 4 is you're gonna get, for a couple of days in the middle of May, you're gonna have the English department is gonna unlock something on our Blackboard. It's the same for all versions of 101. I didn't come up with this. And they're gonna ask you 3 questions. You're gonna pick 1 question to answer, meaning each paragraph that you write better connect back to that question that you were asked. And somewhere in there, somewhere in your essay, which is gonna be about 500 words, by the way, somewhere in that essay, and that's the length that you've been writing essays for me, so you'll have no trouble writing 500 words. It could be longer. But that's the same length I've been asking you to do for first drafts. Somewhere in that essay, you're gonna quote Smith, and somewhere in that essay, you're gonna quote Walker. And that's it. And when I say quote, I mean quote and discuss and give examples and do you agree or disagree and why, etc. That's it. So I guess what remains to be done for the rest of the semester is we need to go over the Smith and Walker so that you are familiar with it. So for starters, download the Smith and Walker from Blackboard. It's in the Unit 4 folder. And read it and reread it. I'd recommend, look, I'm going to read it to you, so maybe that's the only experience you're going to have with it. But my recommendation is you kind of print it out, or that you read it. You read it a couple of times. If anything confuses you, you ask me. If anything, you know what I mean? If anything seems important, underline it, because you're going to want to quote it during the paper. You're going to want to quote it when you're writing paper 4. So if you've already got important shit underlined, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to find what you're looking for. And if there's anything confusing, you can ask me before the exam begins, right? So if you do that, you get ahead of things, you're doing fine. So all that remains for us to do this semester is to go over the Walker and the Smith. And I think I'm going to go over the Walker first. So let's start with this essay by Karen Thompson Walker called "What Fear Can Teach Us." So I have it right here. "What Fear Can Teach Us" by Karen Thompson. You should have a copy like this at your house, and you can take a look at it. So here we go. And by the way, yeah. So there we go. Okay. So all we have to do is go over this essay, and we're gonna go over this essay. And do the same thing with this that I did with Phaedrus. We're gonna go over it. I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna stop and talk about what it means, why it's important, what matters, anything that I think is confusing. I'm gonna try to explain. But I will say, with Phaedrus, I was teaching something I sort of know well and that I really care about, and I spend a lot of time thinking about. Years I've spent thinking about the Phaedrus. In fact, I don't know if you can see this here. Let me turn the camera on. But up here is a little section I have for Plato. But just to give you a little sense, the Phaedrus, has a very important philosophical essay about Phaedrus. That's one of the hardest things I've ever read. And then there's a copy of Phaedrus in here, and there's another copy of Phaedrus in here, and here's another copy of the Phaedrus, and here's another copy of the Phaedrus. So that means that I've literally read the Phaedrus in like 5 different translations or 4 different translations. I spend a lot of time with Phaedrus. I really care about that book. I think it's important. It really matters to me. This is my special shelf of shit that matters to me. So you can see this is all the Shakespeare books, and there's a statue of Shakespeare, and then over here I have a bunch of X-Men comic books. And then over here I have some Kafka and David Lynch stuff. Okay, anyway, so my point is that there's only like 4 or 5 things that matter to me, and Plato was one of them. Walker and Smith are not like that. I don't really know Walker and Smith. I mean, the English department said, hey, you're teaching your students this semester, and like I read it. But like it's not something I've thought of a lot. It's not something I spent a lot of time on. So you may need to ask me questions. Is my point. I don't necessarily. I'm sort of figuring it out myself this semester because it's new to me. Whereas Phaedrus is not new to me. I've been reading Phaedrus for 20 years. So, okay, let's get started with Karen Thompson Walker. What fear can teach us. Okay, here we go. One day in 1819, 3,000 miles off the coast of Chile, in one of the most remote regions of the Pacific Ocean, 20 American sailors watched their ship flood with seawater. They'd been struck by a sperm whale, which had ripped a catastrophic hole in the ship's hull. The ship began to sink, as their ship began to sink beneath the swells, that's the ocean waves, the men huddled together in 3 small whaleboats. These men were 10,000 miles from home, more than 1,000 miles from the nearest scrap of land. In their small boats, they carried only rudimentary navigational equipment. That rudimentary means like super basic, like really too basic to be useful. Rudimentary navigational equipment and limited supplies of food and water. These were the men of the whale ship Essex, whose story would later inspire parts of Moby Dick. Moby Dick is one of the most famous novels ever written. People say it's one of the best novels ever written. I agree with those people. It is one of the best novels ever written. I don't know if you would like it. It's an 800, Moby Dick is like an 800-page book about whales, but it's not really about whales. It's about God. The whale is a metaphor for God. It's a whole thing. It's basically about a whale that bites off this Captain Ahab's leg, and then he decides he's going to hunt it down and murder it to get revenge against the whale. But he's not really mad at the whale. He's mad at God, and what he wants to do is kill God. And it's like 800 pages of shit about whales. I think it's amazing, but my students don't love books, and they really don't love books that are long, and it is a fucking long book. It is also frequently boring, and I like the boring parts because I think it makes the exciting parts more fun, and it's also boring in a funny way, which is hard to explain. But it's because it's like the joke is that it's like too much information. It's a little bit like reading a Wikipedia article about whales, but it's a cool book. Anyway, this is Walker is talking about the real life wreck that actually inspired parts of Moby Dick. I think the catastrophic, which means disastrous, rudimentary. I don't think you got too much stuff in here to do it. That's it. Okay, but again, if you have vocabulary questions, look them up. If you need help, ask me. There may be something in here that I assume everybody knows and you might not know. I assume you know that a whale is a very large creature that swims in the ocean, and it smashed into the ship and sunk it, and these guys are on little lifeboats. Okay, so I don't think I have a whole lot to say about that. All right, let's keep going. Oh, even in today's world, their situation would be really dire, meaning dangerous, meaning bad. Even in today's world, their situation would be really dire. But think about how much worse it would have been then, because this is 1819. This is literally 200 years ago. No one on land had any idea that anything had gone wrong. No search party was coming to look for these men. Most of us have never experienced a situation as frightening as the one on which those sailors found themselves, but we all know what it's like to be afraid. We know how fear feels, but I'm not sure we spend enough time thinking about what our fears mean. By the way, this is a technique that I often don't talk about this stuff with my students because it's sort of slightly fancier than a lot of them need. But you see how it starts off with like a story that's really interesting to hook your attention about these guys that died? It's an example. Now, usually I tell you, give me your opinion, give me a reason, then give me an example to back it up. But it's possible to start with an example and tell people what it's an example of later. So this person he's talking about this essay notice that the essay is called, what is it called? What Fear Can Teach Us? Yeah, it's called What Fear Can Teach Us. So Karen Walker, she starts out with an example about a fearful situation. These guys, their ship got destroyed and they're in a rowboat or whatever, trying to, super far from home and land or anything, and they might all die. So it's an essay about fear. And just to keep things simple, I tell you guys, start talking, give me an opinion, give me a reason, back it up with an example. But you can just start with an example. That's all she's done there. I told you those things in the 101 handout. You can kind of rearrange them. All she did was start with an example. It's possible, if you know what you're going to write about, to start with an example. Usually my students don't know what they're going to write ahead of time, and so starting with an example is a bad idea, because an example of what? But it's a technique you can use in your writing. All right, I'll see you in the next video.